For the last 3 weeks, we've been hearing stories about the vineyard. The vineyard owner goes out to gather workers during all the hours of the day. There's a need to gather in the harvest. We're coming to something important. Something is ready and waiting for us. Jesus has already entered into Jerusalem. This is like Tuesday in Holy Week. The challenges and the threats are in the air. So these stories that we hear are stories about the fulfillment of time, end time stories. And certainly a wedding banquet is also a story about fulfillment, the fullness of time. And the wedding banquet celebrates the fullness of our humanity. The married couple will bring children into the world, so the future is complete. Life is full. And in Israel's imagination, whenever Israel thinks about their relationship to God, they imagine the relationship like a marriage. God is the bridegroom, and Israel is the bride, the beloved one of God. Now, there's something a bit unusual about this banquet that we hear about in the gospel today. It doesn't sound like a banquet that God is hosting. This king sounds an awful lot like King Herod. At a banquet at his house, he served the head of John the Baptist on a platter for dessert. There's also something a bit unusual about the banquet that Isaiah imagines. It's not like any banquet we've been invited to before. In the words of Isaiah, this is a hope on the lips of hungry people who scarcely have enough. And now the hunger is abolished by the luxuriant God who uses the best china and silver and spares nothing and causes an end to all the gnawing lack. Here is how Isaiah dreams about it. On this mountain, the Lord of hosts will make for all peoples a feast of rich food, a feast of well-aged wines. The mountain, of course, is Jerusalem, and the children of Israel long to return home to their beloved city. But this reunion will not be like it was in the old days, for God is doing something new. The banquet that God prepares on that mountain is not just for the chosen people, but rather it is for all peoples and all nations. The word all occurs 5 times in 3 verses. We might hear this speech, this dream of Isaiah, from familiar words of Martin Luther King, who spoke about having been to that mountaintop and looking over and seeing the promise that God had prepared. I may not get there with you, he said, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. I may not get there with you. Someone is missing from this wedding banquet. Someone is going to be left behind. Last Sunday, Jesus gave us a lens for how we might hear these parables. He quoted Psalm 118. Do you not remember that the stone rejected by the builders has become the cornerstone? We have a similar saying in today's gospel. The gospel ended with the statement, many are called, but few are chosen. There's actually a word play here in Aramaic. The words many and few can also be taken in a qualitative sense instead of just a quantitative sense. So the expression might be rendered, the mighty are called, but the little are chosen. With that image, we might see Jesus, the one who was rejected, the little one, the least, who was bound hand and foot and thrown into the outer darkness. There's someone else missing from this wedding. Did you notice? There was no mention of the bride. It turns out that the guests are the bride. They were invited not to witness a wedding. They were invited to be married to the Son. They were invited not to observe. They were invited to participate. The requirement is a wedding garment, an eagerness to be united to the Son. This wedding garment signals a readiness to understand and to act on Jesus' teachings. They must marry the revelation of God and bear children, acts of justice, compassion, and love in the world. You are invited to live in the world of God's newness. In that world, you might say with the psalmist, "The Lord is my shepherd, there is nothing I shall want." It turns out that instead of bringing gifts to the wedding, you are invited to receive the abundant gift of God. And now you know why people didn't want to come. Because truth to tell, it's hard for us to receive gifts. Charles Eisenstein, in his writing on sacred economy, this gift, the economy of gift, he says we have trouble receiving gifts because it creates gratitude or obligation. To willingly receive a gift is itself a form of generosity. It says, I'm willing to owe you one. I'm willing to be in the debt of God and the universe. Clearly then, reluctance to receive is actually reluctance to give. We think we're being noble, self-sacrificing, or unselfish if we prefer to give rather than to receive. But Eisenstein says we're doing nothing of the sort. The generous person gives and receives with an equally open hand. Don't be afraid to be under obligation, to be in gratitude. Paul was struggling with that in the second reading today. Paul is in chains, awaiting execution, and the Philippians sent him money to take care of him. Now, Paul is a rugged individualist. He's always prided himself in being able to take care of himself. So although he does get around to thanking them by the end of the letter, let me tell you what he said with a little bit different inflection than the way Jim read it. I rejoice in the Lord greatly that now at last you have revived your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned for me, but had no opportunity to show it. Not that I'm referring to being in need, for I've learned to be content with whatever I have. Talk about laying on the guilt. Paul's struggling to be in their debt. As I mentioned last week, when trees bear fruit, it's not for the sake of the tree, but for others who receive nourishment from the fruit. Animals, from small worms to large beasts, may eat the fruit, and humans may harvest them to use for themselves or sell as food to others. Christian fruit-bearing are acts done for the good of others. Everything we have is gift. Every Sunday we bring in response and gratitude a portion of what we have received as gift to give back to God. We might think of the gift that we give, the monetary gift that we choose to offer each week, as an apple. In ancient times, people offered God the first or the finest fruits of their labor as a covenantal sign of faith. Well, there are lots of bites taken out of our apple. If we were to give God the gift of an apple, would we offer him one with a bite taken out of it? Would we offer one that's half-eaten? Implied in the notion that by giving to God first, we are not giving of our excess what's left after the bites are taken out of the apple. Would we offer God a mere apple core? Giving our first fruits is an outward sign of our love for God. When we give our finest, it shows trust in God's plans for us. Leaving what we commit to God to the last minute can become a whole apple one week, a half of an apple the next week, and no apple the week after that. So how much should we give? Richard Rohr says, we do not think ourselves into new ways of living. We live ourselves into new ways of thinking. I was reflecting on that wisdom a couple of weeks ago using the two words orthopraxy and orthodoxy. Orthopraxy means the right doing, the right actions. And orthodoxy, of course, means right believing or right thinking. And the truth is that you don't get to the right practice by changing your thinking. You get to right thinking by doing the right thing. I know when we first started talking about sacrificial giving, probably 16, 17 years ago, I realized that I couldn't talk about it unless I was actually doing it. Before I could ask you to give generously, I had to start giving generously myself. In the Bible, kind of the benchmark for giving is called a tithe. And a tithe means 10%. 10% is a pretty high bar. Every Sunday in our parish, we give away 10% of our Sunday collection. We give it away to the poor. Now, I got to tell you, that was not my idea. When somebody first proposed that we do that, I said, that's impossible. We can't give our money away. We need it. But as soon as we began doing it, as soon as the parish council said we ought to do this, I began to understand. I was probably the first convert. It's the only budget item we have that's exact. It's always right to the penny. And we never have to worry about it because we take it right off the top. So if we think about 10%, this tithe, there's an old chart of giving by denomination that I've always thought was kind of interesting. In this chart, several years old, in this chart, the Assembly of God folks are way over the mark here. They're the high achievers, 12% and even higher than that. Baptists and some of the other mainline denominations are a little more balanced, 5 to 6.5%. The Lutherans are not really all that generous. But Catholics, though, are pretty low on the chart, about 1.3%. So here's my goal. I think if you start at 1.3%, getting to 10% is an awful big leap. So rather, I'd like to double what we get now. We'll beat the Lutherans, and we'll have more than we need. In fact, you might think of it this way. Give the first hour of the week to God. If you work 40 hours in the week, that first hour is 2.5%. That could be a good starting point, 2.5%. Here's the thing. When God has your money, God has your heart. You will never miss money you give away. Because when you give it away, something happens in your heart. No one who has ever lived a life of extravagant generosity has come back saying, I regret doing it. I've been reading a book by Andy Stanley. He's the senior pastor of North Point Community Church in Atlanta, Georgia. The book is called Deep and Wide, Creating Churches Unchurched People Love to Attend. And Andy identifies 3 P words, invites us to become a 3P giver. The first P is priority. When you get some money, you give some away. Prioritize means you give off the top before you pay the mortgage or buy groceries. You place a priority to give on the ministries you feel God is leading you to invest in. Giving off the top helps you minimize fear because you don't have to worry about things at the end of the month when you've already given priority to ministries that help advance the kingdom of God. Secondly, percentage. It means to set a certain percentage of your income. You pre-decide how much you're going to give away versus discovering at tax time what you did. This gives you something objective to shoot for and helps to remove emotions from the equation. A percentage of what you bring in is fairly black and white and easy to measure whether or not you are hitting the mark. Even if you only give 1%, commit to a percentage and stick to it. But then, God is going to challenge us to take another step, to be progressive. As we receive more wealth, we should give higher percentages away. Progressive means you remain open to God, growing and stretching you in the area of giving. Once you've crossed that threshold of giving, it becomes less and less a test of our faith because you're more comfortable with how much you are giving away. I know when I first became a percentage giver, I set 5% as my target. And the first year I remember I was pretty worried about that, but I got through the year and it seemed okay. So that was what I did for several years, and then a couple years ago I decided to take that next step to go to 6%. And it wasn't like that first commitment, because once I'd already made that step, the next step was pretty easy. Well, we're happy to receive your gift of money in whatever way you want to give it. Some people give their envelope every Sunday. Some people, they'll They'll drop their envelope off during the week in the office. Some people send like a online paying system. We get checks in the mail from people for their Sunday donations. But the last couple of years, people have been asking about giving online. We have online giving already set up. But it was a little bit awkward because you had to call us up and we had to actually initiate the transaction, which left us in control and you were not in control. The other thing people were asking for was to be able to use their credit card as well as their bank account. So as of this week, we now have online giving on our webpage. In fact, on the little green strip you got today, you have a QR code. So feel free to take out your phone, make a donation right now during Mass. You don't even have to wait. But one of the things we invite you to do, of course, you can make a one-time gift anytime you feel so inclined, but we encourage you to make a gift, a recurring gift, to think about that challenge to give the first hour of your week. So we've decided to set it up that we'll receive gifts, whatever day you do, it doesn't matter, but the gifts will only be, actually, the transaction will take place on, the first will be every Monday. In fact, I got an email today telling me that my gift will be taken tomorrow morning, I assume. So every Monday we'll process those gifts. So the first day of the week. Also the first day of the month. Some people like to give on a monthly basis. And people who get paid every 2 weeks like to do that. So the 1st and 15th of the month. And then because some of us give through the CSA on a quarterly basis, also the first day of the quarter. So those would be the 4 days that we will receive your gift amount. If you become a percentage giver, that means that you're willing to make a sacrifice. And the word sacrifice means to make holy. We can all make equal sacrifice, even though our gift amount will be different. But when we make this step of faith, we ask God to take what we have and to multiply it, to do something more with it. And it's always a challenge. It's always to take that first step, to be able to take that step forth in faith. So I want to repeat the promise that I've made for as long as we've been doing this. My promise is that anybody who is willing to take this step to become a percentage giver, a sacrificial giver, if it should happen that something changes in your life and you need that money back, we're happy to give you that money back. I've actually done this several times. I never worry about it because I give it back, and then when people get back on their feet, they give it back to me with more besides. So I got your back. Don't have to worry about that. Let me close with this, my favorite line from the Gospel of Luke. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For the measure you give will be the measure you get back.